Hey, what's up, friends and family? Thank you so much for joining this channel. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe these videos. It helps get the word out. So it's not just for me, this isn't monetized, but if you get that algorithm going, we do get more people involved and they get to join in on these panels and the other fun little videos that I do here. So thank you guys for checking this video out. This is a panel I had with Brandon Boyles and Eric Vogel, two certified experts with keeping venomous snakes at home. So I don't keep venomous snakes. If I did, I wouldn't have the container behind me open. So this was really enlightening for me, and it runs about an hour and a half long. They start getting into the safety pretty quick, but really hammer it home later on in the video. So definitely it's one you want to listen to if you're considering getting a venomous snake. Um, you couldn't ask for help from two better guys, and I really appreciate them taking the time to sit down and chat with me over Zoom. Check it out.
All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to my guests, Eric Vogel of Generic Reptiles, um, Brandon Boyles, Venoman20, you know him from YouTube and formerly of TikTok. Uh, but today we're going to be talking about keeping venomous snakes as pets. So this is a fun one. It's a little bit out of my comfort zone because I've constantly gone with on these previous panels with animals that I've known. Gopher snakes, rainbow boas, and talking about husbandry and things like that. So this is going to be a fun one because I have no idea. I don't know the first thing when it comes to keeping venomous snakes as pets. So I brought on two people that really do. These are guys who you could find on social media. Brandon's got a big YouTube channel, Venomman20. But I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. We'll start with you, Eric. So welcome. If you could introduce yourself, tell me how you work with reptiles, how you first got into them, and also kind of lead into that. Were you always interested in venomous snakes, or did you start with other reptiles?
Um, so my name's Eric Vogel. Let's see. I've been working with snakes overall on and off, probably for 10 to 12 years throughout my life, non-venomous stuff. When I was young, I lived in Florida, so I had access to catch copperheads and all those other good snakes down there, eastern diamondbacks, prairie rattlesnakes, things like that. So, not prairie rattlesnakes, sorry. I'm having a blank here. Pygmy rattlesnakes.
Pygmy.
Sorry.
Okay.
But I really started getting into it heavily up in the state I'm in right now about 4 years ago when I moved here. And so for the last 4 years, pretty consistently, I've been keeping up here in Ohio, and I've had as many as I don't know, 120 to 130 in my collection, and right now dwindled down a little bit. Work's keeping me pretty busy, and unfortunately I travel a lot for work now, and my state's gotten a little tough on some standards, um, especially on the insurance perspective for it. So just working through some legalities and things like that right now. But yeah, that's basically it.
Awesome. And I do want to touch base, talk about that later on in the panel as well about the permitting and things like that. So welcome, Eric. It's a pleasure to meet you. Brandon, can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, so I've been keeping reptiles since I was about 4 years old. I got into venomous probably a little younger than I should have, but I've been keeping those for about 17 years now. Um, I've worked in serpentariums and zoos. Now I'm just a private hobbyist, but I still keep a pretty large collection and oversee a relatively large collection. So yeah, I've worked with a little bit of everything. I've worked wild snakes, although I don't get much time to go out and look for them nowadays. Used to be a thing I did my entire childhood, but nowadays I just focus mainly on the private sector, private keeping of venomous reptiles.
Right on. And then so I'll follow up. And what is it about what is it about venomous snakes that drew you in? Was it the danger? Was it their biology? What triggered it for you, do you think?
You want me or
Oh
Eric?
yeah, stay in with you, Brandon.
Okay. So I don't. Originally, I didn't really want to get into Venomous. Venomous was not something that really intrigued me as a child. I thought it was just dangerous. Like, these are bad animals. Why do I want to be around them? And then I was 12 years old hiking out through Arizona, and I went to take a step. I was about 2 inches away from stepping on a Western Diamondback. I was probably about 2 hours away from any hospital that had anti-venom, and I knew he was pretty far out. So I slowly backed up, and everything went right. I mean, he was not. He had no mean in his heart. He didn't have. He wasn't vicious. Discovery Channel and Animal Planet back then told me that he would chase me home. He would try to murder my family, and that's just not true. That's not what snakes do. Once you start keeping regular snakes, ball pythons, corn snakes, pine snakes, you're like, wow, these are really nice creatures. I've always been terrified of something that's actually very calm, very placid. Same way with Venomous. A lot of people are like, wow, that's really dangerous. And yes, it can be. But I fear the drive to the venomous reptile building, not actually working the venomous reptiles. I don't see it that way. This is my happy place. This is where I'm at peace, but I really got into it just because of that one experience. And the more I researched, the more I handled, I realized these animals are pretty neat. They're pretty calm, pretty placid.
Right on, Eric. What drew you?
So I'm always been an adrenaline junkie. Just different hobbies and sports and things like that. Sports are a thing of the past because I got fat. But I've always been into kind of the stuff that gets your heart racing. But one thing about venomous snakes over a lot of non-venomous snakes is I use the word loosely, but kind of intelligence and mannerisms. You don't find, in my opinion, many venomous snakes or many non-venomous snakes that have the same mannerisms and movement as venomous snakes do, and I find it intriguing. I find their method of hunting intriguing. I grew up with constrictors, boas, ball pythons. Well, not ball pythons, that's my wife's thing, but mainly boas. And my wife's sitting next to me giving me the face. So, but I don't know. I find their shape, their colors, their look just more intriguing than a lot of the non-venomous counterparts. And don't get me wrong, there are some non-venomous snakes that I find very, very neat. But overall, my favorite venomous, it's probably the king cobras. I just find they're different to work with than any other snake, and it's a rewarding experience once you get used to them. Just kind of feel fulfilled at the end of the day. So.
Mm-hmm. Right on. I could identify with that for both of you guys. I don't get out to hurt much, but when I do, and sometimes come across them at work, something about coming across a rattlesnake as opposed to a gopher snake is just one, it gets your heart rate going a lot more, especially a big one that's got the big rattle. But two, yeah, it's fun. It's fun seeing something that's supposed to be so crazy dangerous, just being a regular animal, in the rocks. So. Eric, we'll stay with you. I wanted to ask, there's room for a lot of controversy amongst venomous keepers about the right or privilege to even own these animals as captives. Considering your keepers yourselves, I'm curious what you think about the legality of keeping venomous reptiles. Are there some species we should not be allowed to keep? Should anyone who wants one be able to purchase one? Should it be a permitted system? Is there any merit to outright bans on venomous reptiles in a city or a state?
So I'm not a big believer in outright bans. I think bans infringe on people's freedoms, and on the flip side of that, I also believe that owning these animals is a privilege. I don't think it's a right. And I'm not very political. I try to stay out of that mess because I don't care. but I do feel that a lot of times these snakes end up in the wrong people's hands, and I get it. Everybody's got to start somewhere. A lot of people don't have access to mentors. A lot of people have to teach themselves. um I mean, there's areas and cities and states, and a lot of people these days don't even want a mentor. They get involved with people, and a lot of these guys that want a mentor, they flake out. They're not really serious. It's kind of like day one, they walk in your house, they're expecting, hey, when do I get to pick up the king cobra, or when do I get to pick up the bushmaster? um but I do believe that all cities and states, counties, every level of the government should have some type of permitting system um, for dealing with these animals. I mean, they're capable of killing you, and a lot of people use the reference, well, so is a gun. But the one thing is the guns don't have a mind of their own.
Mm-hmm.
So as to where a snake can decide it's in a bad mood and bite you and end your life, or cause serious damage, a gun can't do that unless you pull the trigger. So I do believe there should be some type of permitting system. I don't know if it needs to be strict like Ohio is, or or as strict as Florida is, although I see why these states enacted the laws they did. I'm happy that some of these states do enact laws as opposed to doing outright bans, because it allows people that are that go through the legwork and are responsible to own the animals, and it cuts out a lot of the irresponsible keepers. And granted, I mean, there's people all over the U.S., even in permitted areas, that keep illegally. I mean, don't think for a second just because you're in a regulated state that there's not a whole slew of people that don't keep illegally. However, when you're in a permitted state, it's a little bit more difficult to get your hands on some of these animals. I mean, I'm lucky even having my permit in Ohio if people will ship me snakes here. It's there's just so many vendors out there that don't want to deal with it because they know Ohio's so regulated. It's a difficult feat, but places like Texas, and I've got a lot of good friends in Texas, Pennsylvania. I got a lot of good friends in Pennsylvania also. I mean, those states, in my opinion, they're just a little too loose. Being able to go to Academy Sports and spend $20 to get your permit to be able to keep a mamba. I mean, there's nothing preventing somebody that's living in Texas from going to their local show down there and picking up a brand new import, Western green mamba as their first snake. I mean, there's nothing that inhibits it. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we've all heard the stories about a lot of the bites in the past year. I know some of those people personally. I'm not going to comment on my thoughts on it, but it all stems from I guess taking your eye off the prize. I mean, a lot of these snakes move very fast, and they strike at speeds that humans are unable to compete with. I mean, fractions of a second, as to where human reaction time is a lot greater. So, I mean, a lot of these animals people take a little lightly, and people also take the fact of, they don't take into account the after effects, and what happens if you do get bitten. Forget getting to the hospital and getting cured, but that big picture, looking at the overall picture here, what's going to happen after I get bitten on a global scale? Who's going to find out about it? Who knows about it? I mean, there's reports of some people that got bit that called 911. Obviously, then it becomes public record and everybody knows. When you're procuring antivenom from a zoo, I mean, don't think for a second that news channels don't find out what zoos are giving this antivenom up and going to interview for news stories, because frankly, let's face it, there's a lot of professional associations out there that don't think private keepers should have anything to do with venomous snakes. I mean, it doesn't affect them at all. Well, it does affect them, but they just, almost, I could almost say that they're on like the side of, HSUS or PETA or things like that, where they don't think that private keepers should own these animals. They should be on display in zoos. with strict safety protocols and so on and so forth. I don't agree with that. I think there's a ton of responsible people out there that can manage to house these snakes and keep them as beautiful display animals. But I can keep going on a tangent on this aspect. I won't go for the rest of the night on it. But I mean, so we've all been there. I've been I've been an irresponsible idiot with snakes before. I've done some dumb stuff that I shouldn't have. But I also outgrew it. I realized that, what are the consequences of my actions? And I think about that a lot, not only in snake life, but all of my life. If I do something, what's the consequence of doing it? If someone sees me doing something, do I want my kids copying it? Do I want people on Instagram copying it? Do I want to be responsible for someone else being an idiot? My answer is no, I don't. So I made up my mind a few years ago that I was going to, change a lot of the things I did and the way I kept and I wanted to shoot more for being a responsible keeper. I joined up with Brent Schulz and Rudy Arceo for their Venom Institute. Doing some online training videos and promoting safekeeping and so on and so forth. And that's the stuff I want to do within the hobby. That's what I want to be known for. So, but everybody does dumb stuff once. It's a question of what you do after that. So.
Yeah, it's good. I like that. In my life, I've adopted the approach, and it took, 30 years plus to get there, of just asking myself, well, what's the worst that could happen? And I mean, that's a phrase you've heard since you were a kid, but actually trying to follow up on that, and then acknowledging what the worst is and trying to prevent it, I think makes a big difference.
100%. I mean, you can look at the, look at the event in North Carolina with the keeper that got bitten by the mamba, and then we had a cobra on the loose there also. I'm not into speaking names or anything like that, because I don't believe in calling people out like that right now. But in hindsight, did that person ever think that the actions that happened, did he think that the magnitude of what's going on with them trying to, I mean, one congressman in Raleigh is, pushing hard to just totally outright ban these animals in Raleigh. And I know, the first go around, it kind of got put on ice, but this is the same thing happened up here in Ohio. I mean, it all started in Ohio with the Zanesville massacre back in 2012 or 13. Ohio used to be one of the loosest states in the nation for exotic animals. I mean, you could own anything. You wanted to buy a lion, cool, go buy it. There was no regulation at all. You didn't have to be, no licenses, no permits. You want alligators and bears and crocodiles and lions and tigers, go buy them. That's it. And then the Zanesville massacre happened, and obviously there's a whole bunch of stories behind that, conspiracy theories, which I won't get into. But all of a sudden now the state's like, whoa, we got to do some regulation here. And the Zanesville massacre had nothing to do with venomous snakes or constrictors. Like that guy didn't let any cobras loose.
Right.
It was all lions and tigers and bears and things like that got shot and killed there. But the state had an opening and they took it. It's let me lump all of these animals in with our Dangerous Animal Act here, and let me figure out a way to lump all that in to make sure the people that are getting stuff is responsible. And for a long time here in Ohio, it was very difficult for people to get permitted. There were people that from before that got grandfathered in, but once your animal died, you were done. It wasn't like you got grandfathered in and you could just go buy more stuff. It was, you had to report whatever you had to the state. You had to get a shelter permit to keep what you had. But once it died, you're done. And venomous snakes got lumped into that. And, to live here and own venomous snakes, it's hard. I mean, it is a tough feat. You've got to basically have access to your own antivenom. Or not your own, you have to have access to somebody's antivenom, but the state needs proof of where that antivenom is located and that you have access to it for every species you carry. I mean, you got to have liability insurance in case someone gets bitten on your property, and hefty amounts. We're not talking about 25 or 50 grand. If you want a collection of 17 plus animals, you're getting a $500,000 policy.
Right.
and there's just not that many companies out there that want to take that risk to insure, and the insurance is expensive. I mean, the premium that I got quoted last for liability is like $1,300 a month.
Wow.
I mean, so that's one of the things I'm working through right now is is trying to find a company, because so renter's insurance covers it. Some policies you've just got to contact the agents and kind of work through the loopholes. But I mean, frankly, I want a policy where there's no questions asked if somebody gets bitten, because mistakes happen, things happen, so on and so forth. But going back to regulations, I mean, people don't realize that a fraction of a second can ruin something for a lot of people. And escapes are the worst. I mean, I live right next to Pennsylvania, and every day I see these Pennsylvania snake forums where an alligator's floating through the river in Pennsylvania. Like somebody bought a baby gator at one of the shows, let it out in the river because it got too big, and these game wardens and officials find a year-old alligator in the middle of Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the dude didn't swim his way all the way up from Florida. I mean,
No, that's a good point.
Luckily we haven't had any major escapes here. We've had some seizures in Ohio, as far as people getting things seized, that I've heard of. Typically the state doesn't contact us, because if they have a seizure, they try to get the animals as far away from the keeper as possible and try to keep it confidential. So typically they don't offer us anything with things like that. So, but I mean, my wife and I here, we're a certified rescue facility also in the state of Ohio. So we can have any animal we want here if it's donated to us or rescued. Cool. We're licensed to be able to have lions, tigers, snakes, whatever we want. So it's amazing what we see and hear on a weekly basis up here, as far as what people keep. And I know there was a black mamba surrendered to Ohio Department of Agriculture probably about 3 months ago, and they ended up donating it to a zoo. But it's just crazy what they find up here. It's crazy what people try to sell up here. People go over to Hamburg in Pennsylvania across the border, come back with a Atrox, Western Diamondback, and they're out here on public forums trying to trade it for a Burmese python.
Wow.
So
that's
it's nuts.
Well, thank you. Let me have Brandon jump in. What are your thoughts on the regulations and legality of owning Venomous?
It's pretty crazy. Like things have really changed since when I got in. I see states dropping slowly but surely. This state will now be illegal. That one's impossible to get in. And when I started, it was definitely different. There wasn't an internet. You couldn't just call up somebody, or you couldn't just like get on a forum and buy something and have it shipped to you, or Delta Dash to you. You would actually have to call up somebody that you would have to first find out who had it. You would have to call the person. You would have to talk a really big game with them. You'd have to, prove that you're worthy of said animal. You would have to go pick it up from their house, and so on and so forth. So in my mind, it was more like almost like falconry back then. You had to be trained. You had to know what you were doing. But nowadays, you can just go online and buy something. You can go to a large show and buy something. And with that, just like Eric said, it's a low cost of entry. You don't even have to necessarily, you don't have to know much. You just have to have the money, and that isn't the best. As far as like laws and regulations, some of them are good. I will agree with that. I think that there has to be some sort of system in place, or we need to monitor ourselves better, because a lot of people do take advantage of it. They buy things that they have no business handling. Things getting loose is just unacceptable. Now, yet again, we are caging venomous snakes. There are venomous snakes out there. There are venomous snakes running free outside. So people are terrified of the things I have behind me, but they're under lock and key. They're inside a locked building. A lot of people hear the word snake and they panic. So therefore, a lot of politicians will go ahead and try to be the hero in that situation and pass more laws. I'm not real political, but at the same time, I don't know. It's kind of I see both sides. I don't think all-out bans are going to help anything. If you ban people from keeping the venomous snakes, they're going to end up putting it as a shoebox underneath their bed if they want it bad enough, and that's not good. We need to know that you have it. So therefore, when you're going to the hospital, we can at least know, okay, well, he keeps venomous snakes. That's why we found him unconscious on this floor. You know, we got a good idea. It's not something that's hidden from the public. I don't know. I definitely think that being extremely loose can also be a bad thing, because, you know, a young kid getting 100 venomous snakes inside his house, and then, you know, I don't know. Now, yet again, some young kids that are more prepared than adults, but that's beside the point. You know, and in a case by case situation, that's just not the case. But yeah, I honestly think that we should treat it like falconry. I think that we should have a training system or something in place. You know, a mentor can go a long way for sure. I was young and dumb once. I get that. Luckily enough, the internet wasn't around back then. You know, Facebook wasn't really much of a thing. So therefore, I couldn't post all this stuff online. Yet again, nor did I really want to, because I always knew that people were watching. You know, I have a lot of parents tell me the little kids watch my videos, so therefore I try to watch my language. I try not to do anything stupid, because just because I can do it, you don't know what's going on behind the cameras. You don't know that that's a snake that I've been working with for 20 years. I understand everything about it. It's having a really good day. It's cold in the room. It just got done feeding. It's the perfect scenario, and that's how I'm able to do that. But unfortunately, some people don't see it like that. You know, if they try to emulate what they see on TV, and that's not the best. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I think some regulation's good, but at the same time, all-out bans don't help nothing. My biggest fear is that there will be a nationwide ban on everything. And if that happens, you know, in my opinion, it's going to hurt the anti-venom banks, or not necessarily the banks, but like the institutes that are collecting the venoms, because some of these snakes, they rely on private keepers to get. They don't all come from the private sector, but if it's harder to keep those animals, there's going to be less of a need to import. So therefore, they're going to have to work a lot harder to get the snakes to their facilities in order to milk for their venom.
Yeah, that's an excellent point as well. I'll stay with you, Brandon. And so let me ask you this then. If so, like I said, I don't know anything about keeping venomous snakes. What would you tell me if I messaged you and said that I wanted to learn how to start keeping them? Would you suggest a beginner species, or what about a beginner non-venomous species?
Erik mentioned that earlier, and it's very true. Not very many non-venomous snakes work like venomous snakes. It's night and day. There isn't much out there that moves like a viper. We could say a blood python is pretty fast and punchy, but in all actuality, it's nothing like a bothrops. There isn't much like a bothrops, you know, the brittlets. So to get ready for that, I think you need to first have a great understanding of, you know, normal snakes, just everyday corn snakes, pine snakes, bulls, whatever, large constrictors. That can definitely help, but it's different working tools. You know, you should be training with tools for sure. That's something you can do on your own, you know, with a non-venomous species. There's a lot of stuff you can learn online, and I'm not talking about watching the YouTube pros. I mean, there's a lot of resource material out there, but at the same time, at some point, you have to step up and do it. Now, if you were over here, I could watch what you were doing, and I would just tell you, hey, man, don't do that. You know, you're standing wrong. Get that back foot back farther. You know, you're too close. A big one for me, if I'm training anybody, I have them put their hand that they're not hooking with in their pocket, because I have a bad tendency of trying to catch stuff if I drop it. If you're dropping a snake off a hook, you don't want to catch it. I've almost done that before, and I've been doing this forever. I was just tired. It was a long day. I wasn't paying attention. It was just a little pygmy rattlesnake. It still would have been a bad bite. It wouldn't have been fun, you know? So just small things like that. When I started, I did it alone for 2 or 3 years, and I was okay. You know, I kept my distance. I tried to mind my P's and Q's. I made some mistakes, but I never got bit. And then I went and found a mentor. And honestly, the mentor that I found, in my opinion, wasn't the best person to be teaching me. But at the same time, watching him for 2 hours, I learned more than I learned the 3 years by myself. Just the way he did things. I'm like, why do you do it like that? That makes sense. That's genius. Why didn't I think of that? Because I hadn't been doing it very long. I didn't have a good understanding, and he did. You know, not only that, finding a mentor is huge for the main fact there's some days I don't want to do it. I'm not in the mood space. I've had a really bad day. It's been really long and I really need to take care of these animals. These are my responsibility. So if I have a mentor, I'm like, hey man, can you come over and take care of this? Like it needs to be taken care of. I don't want to do it. It's a bad day. Can you just, and typically that's what we do. You're going on vacation. I'll watch after your stuff for you. That's not a problem. If you need any help with anything, let's say that snake's really hard to handle. I need backup. Can you just be a spotter? You make sure nothing bad happens. Because it's great to have somebody around that can make sure that you get to the hospital if anything goes wrong. But if those people aren't experienced in how to handle a venomous snake, if anything does go wrong, now we got a loose snake in the building, which isn't the end of the world, because if Erik's anything like me, the building's pretty locked down. I don't think anything's getting out of here. Like it's not really a possibility. So you just have a loose venomous snake instead of building. It's still contained. But yeah, as far as there's forums that you can get on, like Facebook, we have some forums where you can learn, but at the same time, learning through a Facebook post is not the easiest. I tried to do a little handling series on YouTube or like how to, but there's so many, some people have it and some people don't. Some people can work a hook and some people, it just doesn't come natural, so it's nice to be able to see where your level of expertise is. If you're good with the hook, that's great. If you're not, well, maybe we need to figure things out. Maybe you're a shift box type of keeper, which nothing wrong with that, but God forbid the snake get an infected mouth. Now what are you going to do? No vet's going to help you out in this situation, Mm-hmm. I mean, they might prescribe the meds, they might help out to a degree, but you really need to be able to take care of the snake yourself. So.
Very good. Interesting. Thank you. Interestingly enough, my vet is here in Calabasas, and he has like 40 different venomous snakes that he keeps himself. So it was always interesting hearing him talk about stuff like that. Anytime I think I'd have something cool to tell me, he's got a story about a bushmaster or that. I was like, okay, I get it. Thank you. But yeah, no, that's a great point. If you have to find a vet to treat it too, because it's not just any vet that's going to see, a mamba or a gaboon viper or something. Erik, is there a beginning species that you would recommend or something that you would suggest to someone telling you they're interested in it?
I mean, so there's lots of schools of thought on the beginner species thing. My problem with beginner species is people get these animals and they're not interested in them. Someone get a copperhead, you get a copperhead, you get bit, you can go to the hospital, you can get treated. You don't need your own antivenom. The hospitals keep it. But if your heart doesn't lie with keeping copperheads or keeping vipers, it doesn't really prepare you for anything else except the safety aspect. Obviously it's a venomous snake. You've got to keep it, caged, locked, handle it properly with tools. So those are the things it prepares you for. The hard part is it doesn't prepare you for any other movements, for any other snakes. Like there's some snakes that I got into that I'd never gotten to work with before. But I considered myself responsible enough and smart enough to know that I could buy these snakes and not get bitten, and because I didn't take risks with them. I'm very risk oriented. I like kind of cutting edge, seat of my pants stuff. But on the flip side of it, I know when to kind of pull back, and I know when it's something's beyond my skill level. Everybody can handle any snake once. It's just a question of how well you could do it after that. Mm-hmm. I had some snakes that gave me some real scares. There's snakes like boom slangs and mambas that move at a rate of speed that, you're basically defenseless. I've got a good friend that keeps tons of mambas, and I have seen those things move up a hook so quickly once the cage got opened. What do you do? You could drop the hook. You can, what do you do? I've seen those things shoot up a hook so fast that there's no way any human in reaction time could get away from them. And there's trade-offs. There's guys that use longer hooks, and longer hooks are a little bit more difficult to work with certain species with. It's a little bit more difficult to angle. It's a little bit more difficult to work. A lot of people are comfortable with shorter hooks. But again, then there's your trade-off with a shorter hook. The shorter the distance from the throat of the hook to the handle where your hand is, obviously the less time you have to be reactive in the case where something happens. So I don't know if there is a great beginner species. I'm of the impression that if you have the ability to find a mentor and work with the species that you want to keep, if you want to, let's say you want to keep a monocle cobra, let's say that's the species that you love. Okay. I mean, finding somebody that's got one and working around it, learning its mannerisms, its movements, and eventually getting to work with it. I think that person would be a lot more successful in life than going to the show, buying a copperhead, or going out back, getting a wild caught copperhead, throwing it in a cage, trying to learn husbandry on it, so on and so forth. And then 2 months later, you get rid of the copperhead because it's like, yeah, I don't want that crap. And, you move up to something else. Now, granted, I believe there are some snakes that shouldn't be kept as beginner species. Mambas, boomslangs, kings, taipans, some of the more toxic cobras, some of the larger cobras like forest cobras. I think they all make poor first snakes to keep from a venomous perspective. And as Brandon said, I mean, you really should have some experience with non-venomous stuff, at least from a husbandry perspective. There's many non-venomous snakes have the same husbandry requirements as venomous snakes. So, I mean, the worst thing you could possibly want. So there's times where I've gone and bought snakes and not had a cage set up for them when I got home. But I know I'm capable enough to where I know exactly what size bulb or heat panel to get. I know what lighting, I know what size cage, I know what substrate, to where I could put a cage together in 2 hours. And I know that the specifications inside of it are going to be right for this particular snake, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or I know how to set it so I can't damage the snake and I can fine tune it as time goes on. Not recommended, but unfortunately, some people do this as first timers. They're at a show, they impulse buy something, and then they get home and they send a Facebook message to say, hey, what are the husbandry requirements for this snake? And, then they start experimenting when they get the snake home. They end up throwing it in like a 20-gallon aquarium with a screen top with books on top of it. And, and it just becomes a mess. So non-venomous husbandry mastering is like number one in my book before you can even think about a venomous snake.
Well,
because
go ahead. Sorry.
That's all right. You don't have a lot of, so with non-venomous snakes, if I throw a feeder inside there and the snake doesn't eat, I can reach my hand in there. Granted, I might get bitten, but chances are if the snake's not biting the mouse or the rat, he's probably not going to bite your hand either because he's not in feed mode. I can reach my hand in, grab the mouse, whatever I want to do. I don't have to worry. A venomous snake, it's a little different. If you're throwing a live, especially with live feeders with venomous snakes always concerns me for beginners, because they'll throw them in there. And, what happens if the mouse starts biting the cobra's face because the cobra's husbandry is wrong and it doesn't want to eat, or it's in shed, you don't know it, and you've never dealt with that scenario before. What do you do? I mean, you don't think for a second that rats and mice can maim any reptile.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've seen some reptiles get messed up from people leaving rats and mice in for a day, 2 days at a time with no food and then no supervision. Huh?
A rat can kill a snake. Easy.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah. I see it all the time. People getting these snakes get maimed by them because they don't supervise. Well, what if you could supervise, but you have no idea what to do? It's not like you can stick your hand in there in the middle of a cobra's cage and get a rat out. So, temperatures, humidity, what happens if that snake gets scale rot? Do you know how to treat scale rot on a non-venomous snake, let alone a venomous snake? What happens if the venomous snake has mites? Do you know how to treat it? Some of these guys that get imported, they come into these wholesalers collections, they get mites or other disease, and you got to treat it. Do you know how to do that on a non-venomous snake, let alone a venomous snake? So I think when going back to the original question about a first species, I think you get the snake that you feel you could handle as a responsible adult. And if you have the chance to work with that snake in advance through a mentor or anything else, do it. But by no means go and buy a snake that's a beginner snake that you're not in love with, because then you're not into it. I mean, like I have a copperhead and I love him. Actually, that's one of my few remaining venomous snakes right now. Is a copperhead, and she's a great snake. I mean, I got no plans to breed him or anything like that, but he's a really cool snake, and he'll be part of the family forever. It's like a family pet.
Yeah.
But I'm not in love with copperheads. It's not my favorite species, but he's just a cool specimen, and so on and so forth. So that's my take on it.
Well, it's good. And you brought something up when you talked about the feeding, where the husbandry was different. And so, where there's much that's the same with in terms of husbandry is the same with keeping a venomous versus a non-venomous. But feeding is obviously going to be a little bit different because the way that they digest their prey and kill their prey is different. They're not constrictors. So what do you do as a keeper that's different, Erik, when it comes to feeding time?
So first thing I do with venomous, I try to avoid live feeding venomous whenever I can. I mean, there's some wild caught animals that you have to live feed to get them on food. I mean, they may not take frozen as their first meal coming out of a package from Malaysia. But I try to limit it. I try to limit live feeding because I'm not worried about I'm not worried about supervision and how to get the feeder out personally. I'm really worried about being able to interfere fast enough if the snake takes a bite, because I care about the way my snakes look too. Like, some of these rat bites, even though they're superficial, some of them are bad.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've seen snakes with missing scales and just scars all along their backs. And, like, I don't want to do that to my snake. Like, it's a living animal. I don't want to subject it to something. And we talk about feeding, but that's why it's 100% important that husbandry is right, because a lot of these snakes, if they're in improper husbandry, they won't eat. I've seen some of these snakes coming out of the wild, and I mean, it's an act of God to get them eating. You could have all the tricks in the world, but some snakes just don't eat. Out of the wild. You take them out of a huge jungle and you throw them in a 4x2 enclosure, and their life totally changed. They spent however many days in some farm's warehouse with a bunch of other snakes, and then they get thrown into a bag or a bucket and shipped through over the United States, and then they wake up in your basement.
Yeah.
So I mean, feeding, I try to do, if it's a snake that needs a little bit of movement, I try to do pre-killed with rats. So I'll do cervical dislocation on a rat or a mouse, and do pre-killed. And any ones that I get switched over to frozen, I do. I find it a little bit, and there's obviously, it's another one of those hotly debated topics where some guys have been feeding live for years and they throw the feeder in, the snake eats, and they never worry about it. I do. It's just my personal worry and my personal concern. So I try to get everything on frozen or pre-killed as quick as I can, and go from there. The harder ones are snakes like your mambas or your kings. You throw a live mouse inside a mamba's cage. Mamba bites it or doesn't bite it or defensively bites it, or doesn't bite it at all, and it's just running around the cage. Now you've got to open that mamba's cage again to get the mouse or the rat out. And anytime a mamba cage is open, you're in striking range. I mean, that mamba can move fast enough out of its enclosure to where anytime that cage is open, you're in strike range. So what do you do when you got a mouse, because most people use mice, they won't use a rat, with an elapid. Then most of the people use, they'll use a mouse, small mouse, whatever the case may be. I mean, and just most keepers. But I mean, have you ever tried to catch a mouse hopper out of a non-venomous snake's cage?
That's hard enough.
I mean, they're pain in the ass. Like, those things are hopping around and bouncing off the wall. And could you imagine opening the door to a mamba cage and trying to get a live mouse hopper out of it? I mean, it's chaos. I mean, you're putting yourself in a situation where it's like, well, shoot, and like, what do you do? I mean, some people use shift boxes, and that's a scenario where a shift box is a great idea. Like being able to close a shift box to leave a snake inside for easy. easy maintenance. Because I was once under the impression of, every time I want to work on a cage, I want to get the hook time and the handling time to take my snake out and move it and put it in a bucket and so on and so forth. That's great. The problem is there's certain snakes where if you continuously move them, two things. One, I learned a long time ago that if you're into breeding, the more you screw with your snakes, the worse it is. And that goes for handling too.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to breed your snakes or have any plans with your snakes in the future, the more you mess with them in their environment, the less your chances are of those snakes being put together with the opposite sex and wanting to breed. So there's certain species where you need to interact with them because they need to have that desensitization with hooks and so on and so forth. Makes your life a little bit easier to be able to work with them. But there's a balance there. There's a delicate balance. So the shift box thing, when it comes to something like a scenario like I just said, where you got a mouse hopper jumping around, if that animal's inside the shift box and you can just close it, that makes your life 10 times less stressful than trying to work on that. Because if not, the snake's got to come out of the cage before you mess with the mouse. So there's no other way. I mean, you ain't putting a pair of tongues in there with a mamba sitting on the branch right next to you. It just wouldn't be smart. So it's just my opinion.
That's good. Brandon, thank you. Do you have anything to add to that with regards to feeding?
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is I make sure that the rodent is warmed up because I work with a lot of bushmasters and fertilants and stuff like that. With those heat-seeking pits, you got to be pretty on it. Otherwise, they shoot straight past the tongs right at you. And it's kind of cute if it's particulated python. It's not nearly as cute if it's a black-headed bushmaster.
Right.
It just makes for a bad day. But actually going back to the topic at hand earlier, you was talking about getting into venomous snakes and getting a mentor and getting ready for it. One thing I've actually said quite a bit is a lot of people will just kind of wing it. They'll go to a show and buy something just willy-nilly. They don't really care about the animal. If they did care about the animal, they would have worked harder at learning everything about it. But a lot of people just buy it on a whim. And I think a lot of that is just trying to show off. And I'll be downright honest, if you get bit by a monocle cobra trying to show off, it would be much cheaper just to go out and buy a Ferrari and never have to handle that. It's going to be cheaper in the long run, and it's going to impress girls a lot more. They actually probably like the Ferraris. They don't like your monocle. So, it's just, if you're not passionate about it, just like Erik said, there's no point in really getting into it. I mean, it's not a very good show-off tool.
That's a great point. Well, let me ask you this. What if I message you on Facebook and said, hey, I see you keep a lot of venomous snakes. I just picked up this sweet Bushmaster. I don't know anything about it. Can you help me out? What would you tell me?
I'm gonna try to give people information. Like, information's free for me. I'll help anybody that I can. Even people that I know have been keeping forever, if I see that they're working with new species, I'm like, hey man, not trying to step on toes. I'm not trying to say that I'm better than anybody else. I just know I've been working with that species for a while, so be careful doing this. That's the thing you don't want to do. But I'll always try to guide you as much as humanly possible. But at the same time, I can only do so much from my screen over here. I can't watch you actually interact with the animals. So I can't tell you that, hey, opening up that cage with your hand is a really bad idea. I took for granted that you already knew that, but apparently you didn't. So some of it just comes down to common sense. Unfortunately, common sense ain't so common nowadays. So I don't know. Yeah, it's just a lot to it. A lot of people think it's just like keeping any other, and it is to a degree, but at the same time, it's not. Just like Erik said, distances, mambas climbing hooks. I've always said mambas can climb hooks faster than I can throw and scream at a hook, because that's God honest truth. You have to be able to read what they're going to do before they do it. And that's hard with an animal. Any animal expert can tell you it's very tough to tell what an animal's going to do sometimes. But I don't know. It's definitely very rewarding if you ever do get into it. But it's something that you should research a lot before you just step foot into the ring or the arena.
Well, let me ask you this, Brandon. We'll stay with you. You'd mentioned, because you'd mentioned it earlier. You said that your room is basically snake approved, or at least your facility there. What sort of security measures do you have in place? safety measures?
So as far as cages, some of the cages have locks, some of them have latches. I'm only one of 3 people that have keys to this building. Another one's a professional herpetologist, another one's the owner of this building. So we're all trained on how to handle venomous snakes. If I'm going to be working something, I let somebody know, hey, I'm working venomous snakes tonight. I'm here. If you come in, don't just knock first. The building's escape proof, which is, you got to have that. That's just because your cages can be escape proof. That's great. But if we have earthquake right now, what happens with all this glass? Well, it's hard to say. I've seen aquariums split just from the shifting, just picking them up. So if it's a glass cage, it's hard to say exactly what's going to happen. So if your building's escape proof too, now you got 2 forms of barrier. Just try to litigate, clean floor, open spaces so you can see everything that's going on. That helps a lot. Well lit. Another thing that people a lot of times don't take for granted is electricity. Power outages are a real thing. If you have a mamba on the end of a hook when you have a power outage, it's just not fun at all. So floodlights are a really good idea. Head torch is something I've used in the past. Just things like that.
Yeah,
I don't know if that completely answers your question or not, but
yeah, no, that's good. I think that's a key one. Going back to the worst, what's the worst that could happen? You said earthquakes and flood lamps, in case of power outage. I think that's really good prepared. What about you, Eric? I know we've spoke about it on Facebook before, and you've shared sort of the measures you take, but I was wondering if you could share what you do on here.
As far as safety in the rooms.
Exactly. Yeah.
So one of my rooms is completely escape proof. I went to using there's tons of subjects we can go into, and I think a lot of people miss out on you don't just need one room, you need multiple rooms. Even if you don't have a lot of species, you need a place to put new acquisitions, because you don't want to infect anything in your collection with things they may have. I've been through some stuff over the past couple of years, some strange disease things that have been possibly introduced, possibly not. But the fact of the matter remains is, quarantine's a big portion of keeping, and that goes with any animal. You don't bring a brand new dog home and throw it next to your dog you've had for 6 years. There's an introduction period, there's vet visits. You got to make sure what you're getting is healthy before you expose healthy animals to it. Same goes with snakes. There's some diseases that run rampant throughout collections and kill a lot of stuff. And internal parasites, external parasites. So when we're talking about safety, you kind of need multiple rooms when you're setting this stuff up, especially for venomous. But your quarantine room for non-venomous doesn't matter. A snake escapes and gets inside the wall. It sucks. Snake's probably going to die, and it's probably going to smell eventually, but it's not life-threatening.
Right.
You get a cobra that escapes that ends up in a wall and ends up outside your house. You're in trouble. So escape proof's number one for me. And when I say escape proof, not escape resistant, you got to make sure the room's escape proof. You got to get down on your hands and knees. You got to look at all the cracks in the floor, cracks in the wall. You got to look at your ceiling and make sure there's no tiles that can be moved if a snake can get up there. There's some snakes that can get in the weirdest places. My venomous room downstairs has so it's in my basement, and the walls are like cinder block with like stucco in the middle of them, or mud, whatever they use to construct. I watched my monocled cobra that got off a hook once crawl up my wall. Like, I didn't even think that was possible. It was like Spider-Man. And they find the little smallest crevices and cracks, and they're able to maneuver their way up that stuff. And people don't realize like their agility and what they're able to do. And how strong they are, and how many times their weight that these snakes are able to push. So like I have a drop ceiling in my venomous room, because my basement, my rafters or floor joists, where the hell you call them, it was all exposed in my ceiling. So while the room was escape proof on the floor, if I didn't have something up on the ceiling, I mean, snakes could just get in my floors up in my living room and
Right.
whatever. So I had to put a drop ceiling in, and I had to reinforce the tiles so they were unable to be pushed up without, there was kind of a trick we did to be able to unlock them to push them up. But I had to get like creative and had to create a ceiling that was escape proof. Door sweeps on your doors that go in there. I had 2 door sweeps. I had one on the inside and one on the outside. God forbid the snake was able to somehow push through the one on the inside. I made the one on the outside closer to the floor so they couldn't get out of that one. But I don't think people realize what escape proof actually means and what they got to go through. I mean, escape proof means, you spend the time, you conduct tests. I mean, we threw a mandarin rat snake in my venomous room and left it in there for a couple hours to see if it could get out.
Yeah.
Because it's an agile colubrid. And the one we had at the time that we did it with was relatively small. It was probably the size of I don't know, it's probably 1.5 feet long, it was a juvenile. And I have cameras in my venomous room too with motion detection. So if something moves in there, the motion zones I have set up are all along the borders. The way I set up the cages, it's all along the borders of the cages. So if something gets out, I'll know it's out. I mean, they work. I mean, I've never had an escape, knock on wood. But I know they work because I tested it with that rat snake.
Mm-hmm.
But I was watching that rat snake and its mannerisms, and I left it loose in there. My wife and I probably left it loose in there for like 4 or 5 hours or something like that. And we were just watching it on camera and seeing what it did. And, like part of the time it hid like between some cages, because they're not going to continuously look for a way to escape. They're going to look for safety. They're going to look for cover, shelter,
Sure.
so on and so forth. But there was a point at the beginning where the snake was like, okay, where do I go? And it just kept looking for, the paths of least resistance on where to go. So, escape proof's definitely a thing. Locks on the cages. I mean, I'm all for that. If you have an escape proof room and secure caging, the lock's just an extra step, which is great. Depending on, like if you have people that come in your room and, for viewing or that work with your stuff, locks are great. Some people don't use locks. When I stopped working with people and it was just me, I didn't lock my cages. I just made sure they were secure. And my room was escape proof. So, I mean, chances are if a snake's going to escape out of a cage, it's not going through the area that's locked anyway. It's going to go through somewhere else because the lock area usually has a latch or something like that is an initial barrier, an initial security. I've seen a lot of problems with planted exoteras. And exoteras are great cages for certain species like squams and some of your arboreal stuff. They have great ventilation and they show great, they display great. Humidity, I mean, you can modify them a little bit and there's different tricks, but that's a whole other subject. But I've seen some exoteras with that are live planted where the plants will grow into the screen and people don't trim them back and they'll start to lift on the screen. And it's important that you inspect your cages anytime. I used to inspect my cages once a week. So once a week I had a major clean. Like every day was a spot clean day, but like once a week was a major clean day. It's kind of where you go through, check on substrates that need to be changed out, so on and so forth. But I would also check my cages, my enclosures, and make sure no cracks, on the PVC enclosures. If they were screwed together, I'd make sure that all the screws in there were still tight. Make sure all the wiring for the heat panels and lights was proper. Nothing was, in danger of burning the snake or anything like that. And just the safety and security of the cages in the room, it's just something I always checked. But these rules go into effect for your primary room and your quarantine room too. I mean, they both have to have the same specifications as far as safety is concerned. So both my rooms stay locked. You need I have keyed access on one, like those keypad locks. It's
Sure.
just easier than trying to carry your keys on you all the time. We've got lights. Our light switches are on the outside for the rooms. They're not on the inside, so we're able to turn the lights on before we walk into the room. Some people have light switches on the inside of their room, So you've got to open the door to a dark room and then turn the light on, which I'm not a fan of, especially when you've got 100 things in there that can kill you. So I like my light switches on the outside. I keep a set of tools, hooks, tongs on the outside of the door, and then I have the rest of them right when I open the door there. So I do that because God forbid I open the door and there's a snake sitting there, and I can't get to one of my tools on the inside. I've got tools to work with on the outside of the room too.
Okay. Yeah, smart.
So, I mean, as far as safety is concerned, I mean, I think those are the key steps. We obviously haven't covered, things like keeping your own antivenom and things like that, and having your own type of, having an escape plan and having an emergency medical plan and a plan of action and bite protocols. I mean, it's all stuff that goes in with this.
Well, so that's one thing I did want to cover. What is, and just kind of, I don't want to say Cliff's Notes because it's important, but what is a bite protocol?
So, I mean, Joe Pittman from the Florida Snakebite Institute, I believe he's a nurse down on the west coast of Florida. He's an RN there, but he's also he also made this organization, the Florida Snakebite Institute, I believe. But he designed some bite protocols. He sells a flash drive, but he also sells them in print too. I guess to sum it up, a protocol is, okay, if you get bitten, this is the antivenom you use. This is the procedure to treat a bite. There's so much more that goes into bite protocols. Like, everybody thinks like, oh, let me buy the bite protocol, I'm cool. And that's not it. It doesn't end with the bite protocol. I mean, you show up with a bite protocol at a hospital and you just got bitten by a snake. I mean, that's the least of your worries. Half the time the doctor doesn't even follow the bite protocol. They're going to call the toxicologist from the poison control center and they're going to throw your piece of paper in the garbage. So while I'm a big believer in the bite protocols as a part of your full emergency action plan, a lot of these young kids think that let me just buy a bite protocol, I'm safe, I'll be fine, and then they get bitten and they end up in the hospital and they're worried they're going to die and they're Facebook messaging all their friends and what do I do, and this is Venomous Snake 101. This is the first thing you should know to do. You get bitten. So just to brief it up, an emergency action plan is a step-by-step guide for me and for anybody else out there, that this is what you do if you get bit. This is who you call, this is where you go, and this is the procedure. And the doctors or hospital staff where you go should also have a copy of that if you have a hospital in mind that you deal with. My hospital here, I've got two of them. Actually, I've got three of them, but I've got two of them that are within like 7 minutes of my house. So those are my first choices if I get bitten by a very toxic species, because both of them have reviewed my emergency action plan and both of them feel confident that they could stabilize me and transfer me to a larger metro hospital in that case. And I'm comfortable with that. They're both ICU equipped. They both have ventilators. They're both competent hospitals. But I mean, University of Cincinnati Medical Center is my main hospital in the area, but it's a 27-minute drive from here to UC in an ideal world. So I've got a hospital that's 7 minutes away that can stabilize me. And I've got a hospital that can save me that's almost a half an hour away with no traffic. Mm-hmm. If I get bitten by a king or a bushmaster, I'm probably going to the hospital that's 7 minutes away, because I need to be, every minute counts at that point. So I want to have my best chance at being conscious when I get to the hospital. Sure. Right. And that doesn't always happen. I mean, it doesn't happen. So your emergency action plan needs to have everything. Whoever's with you when you handle venomous snakes or in your household or whatever, they also need to be in on your emergency action plan, because if you're unconscious, they need to be able to take it and navigate it. So just brief information. Mine has my doctor's name on it. It has the hospital or hospitals that I go to, the contacts of those hospitals, the addresses, how many miles they are, how many minutes they are, phone numbers for the emergency department so we could call ahead to let them know what we got going on. I have a list of 5 professional snakebite consultants inside my emergency action plan who have all given me permission to contact them or have a physician contact them in the event of an emergency, if there's assistance needed or advice needed. And I have a couple in every time zone. So, I got some on the East Coast, some on Central, and then some on the West Coast, just depending on the time of the day.
Right.
My action plan has the location of my antivenom, which I have on site. What antivenom, and then your bite protocols are in there too. So it has step-by-step instructions for not just you, but the other person that's with you, what they need to do if you get bitten and you're unconscious. What do you do? Make sure the snake's secure. Make sure you grab the sign off the front of the enclosure, because I have Velcro removable signs that show, the species that bit you and so on and so forth. So it's a whole list and a whole plan that's developed in the event of an emergency. Last thing I'll hit on before you go to Brandon is I have had so many people that have gotten bitten, and the first person they message or the third person is me. Like, dude, what the hell do you want me to do for you? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not a doctor. I know what to do, but I'm not a doctor. Like, I'm not going to save your life. My stepdaughter's boyfriend took a snouted cobra bite several months ago, and it's these are things where if you're dealing with these snakes, you need to be confident, you need to be competent, you need to be prepared, because if you make a mistake, the ultimate price is death if you're not prepared. It's the ultimate price. So you need to be prepared to get to your hospital, to make sure that even if you get bitten, that everybody else around you is safe from the snake that's still loose. And you need to know how to treat. It's unfortunate, but some of us keepers that know how to do this and have been around it enough are more educated on snake bites than some of the doctors in the hospitals you go into.
Oh, I believe that.
It's scary. It's very, very scary. And that's the reason I keep some consultants on my list for my emergency action plan too. I mean, let's face it, when you're in a state like Ohio, where I'm at, and there's 5 venomous keepers in the whole state that are legal, how many king cobra bites do you think my local hospital has actually treated?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not like where Brandon lives in Missouri, or down in Texas, where there's a lot of keepers, where like somebody like Spencer Green, toxicologist down there, he's probably dealt with, I don't know, hundreds of snake bites from different species, because everybody calls them. People get bitten. Let me call Spencer. But a lot of these guys in these big metro areas where there's a lot of private keepers, they've gotten experience dealing with mamba bites and gaboon bites and cobra bites, and where I'm at, nobody around here has been bitten by a mamba. So if I walk into a hospital and say I got bitten by a mamba, they're going to look at me with 4 eyes like, what?
Mm-hmm.
So
it's
all in your action plan, man. It's all got to be in there, because you don't know what experience your hospital's got that you're going to.
Fair enough. Yeah, very smart. It's something, if you want to, if you're totally on the outside of venomous snakes and you want to ruin your day, just Google gaboon viper bites and watch the progression of what happens to your body. Brandon, is there something you would add about emergency action plans?
Erik is very good at speaking on this. He pretty much has it dialed down for sure. I do want to touch base on what he already said, the fact that many doctors, many physicians have no idea how to treat exotic venomous bites. That they're not necessarily very versed in native venomous bites unless they get a lot in their hospital, which it's not a very common occurrence. So let alone the exotic venomous. I knew a guy back in the day who had called the ambulance and said, "Hey, I just got bit by my monocle cobra," and the ambulance driver got there and said, "Why are you so worried? He's like, it's a cobra." She's like, "That's not venomous, is it?" And it's like, "Why do you think I'm calling the ambulance?"
Yeah.
And yet again, that's just the ambulance staff. That's not referring to the doctors. But I think there's probably 4, maybe 5 doctors in the United States that I'd even want to treat me when it all came down to it. It's definitely important to have a relationship with the doctors for them to understand that you might come in some night saying, hey, I've been bit by a black-headed bushmaster. This is what we need to do. And they need to be able to trust you and understand that you're not just high off your gourd. You're not some crazy guy out there all loopy on God knows what. When it all comes down to it, that you might you might be completely honest, and that's actually what's going on. So yeah, I think it's very important that you touch base on that first, and that they have a good understanding that you do know what you're talking about. This paperwork is the real deal. That they should call for more help. There was a local guy one time that got bit by a snake that the hospital that he went to was not qualified to handle that severe of a bite. And they're like, oh no, we got it, you're fine. And just because he presented at the emergency room within 15 minutes and he's fine right now, doesn't mean he's going to be fine in 35 minutes. You know, we know that this said species, you might be okay for 45 minutes. There's never been a recorded death faster than 45 minutes. Now, if you go into anaphylaxis, all bets are off, but that's beside the point. That doesn't mean you're going to be conscious in 45 minutes. That means in 15 minutes, you're going to start losing consciousness. You're going to be getting drowsy. You're going to be getting messed up. You're not going to be making any sense anymore. Maybe you're going to lose the ability to speak, like in a monocle bite. You're probably going to lose the ability to communicate. So it's pretty important to know that, for the person to be around you to know that. Yet again, I strongly believe that an ounce of yeah, I completely lost my train of thought on that one. But being ready for the bite is way more important than actually, you know, it goes a long ways. You should always just try to avoid never being on the sharp end, but it's always important to not take for granted that you're never going to be on the sharp end, because statistically speaking, there is a chance you're going to get bit. I don't think that it's guaranteed. A lot of people says it isn't if, it's when. I strongly believe that, yeah, one person once described it to me, you could cross the highway once and make it, but do you think you could make it 1,000,000 times? And I say, if I look both ways every single time, the same as I did the first time, there's no reason why I can't make it. Now, yet again, there could be a freak accident. There could be an earthquake right now, God forbid, but it could happen. But at the same time, if I don't get within strike range on that species, if I don't ever go in tired or half cocked, there's a good chance that at the end of the day, I'm going to go home safe. You know, it's not the most dangerous thing in the world. What was there? There was like 4,500 bites last year in the United States, something like that. And only 4 people died. I mean, statistically speaking, COVID's way bigger of a deal. Driving a car is way bigger of a deal. Bungee jumping's way more dangerous. So I definitely think it needs to be taken seriously, though. And it's great for people like Erik. He speaks on the matter very well. It's definitely important that you contact your facility beforehand, figure out exactly what you're going to do. You know, I try not to ever handle anything of any seriousness during rush hour. You know, don't handle right when you get off work. I know what those roads are like. I don't want to be on the road when there's a lot of cars, because when there's a lot of cars, there's a lot of accidents. There's a lot of accidents. The hospital's already stressed. Not only that, is it going to be bumper to bumper? Maybe you get out there and you can't get to the hospital to begin with. That's not good. Is the weather not adequate? You know, is it snowing? Is it raining? There's just a million things you need to think about. You gotta really focus on what you're doing, not just wing it every time.
Thank you guys both for that. I think that's something that maybe not everyone thinks about to that extent. We all know it's dangerous, but maybe we don't realize just what it takes to prepare yourself for that danger. Because you can, like you said, if you look both ways, each and every time, and you know, take the steps, there's a lot of ways you can help prevent the worst from happening. Let me close it with kind of a two-parter question, and we'll stay with you, Brandon. So the first would be, what is the most overrated venomous species to keep? And then follow it with the very cliche, if you could only keep one venomous species for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oh, man. So most overrated, I hate to say this because I'm going to lose subscribers and followers left and right now, but gaboon vipers, they're beautiful, they're cool, they're nice to look at, but they're literally a pet rock. They just sit there. It is one of the fastest striking venomous snakes in the world, so that's impressive. But to see it move is a real rarity. And it just sits there and it's fun to look at for the first year. You're like, this is an incredible species. I love this snake. I love its pattern. And then the new wears off and you're like, I've seen that pattern before. It's the same thing over. And it never does anything. Nothing ever changes. It's just the same snake. Now, I still keep them. They're interesting. It's still fun to look at, but that's pretty much it. Working with it, it doesn't have much character. It doesn't do much. They're kind of huffy puffy, but nothing that crazy. I love intelligence when it comes to venomous snakes. Like, that's my thing. King cobras are incredible, but they can be a real challenge. Forest cobras I got forest cobras way too young. I was probably 18 years old, and it's probably one of the most demanding venomous snakes out there. Not monocle cobras, mambas are so smart. They will sit back into the corner of the cage and they'll watch you, and they understand if that glass is there or not. They're very keen. They're so smart. I think I would say forest cobras. I love forest cobras, and pretty much everybody keeping venomous snakes is like, that's the worst venomous snake. Why would you want that one? And it's just because of the intelligence. They're very smart. Now, yet again, I'm going to say in 10 to 20 years, I'm going to be too old to handle forest cobras. I would definitely have to give it up. It's just too quick. They're too fast. It's not. So maybe I would pick something a little bit less demanding if it was the only one I could ever keep again, but I don't know what that would be. It would have to be, something that would be relatively easy to take care of, maybe eyelash vipers or something like that. But I really like forest cobras. I like my time with them. I like interacting with them, even though every time it can just be your worst day. They're so quick. I remember one time one was jetting as fast as he could to get behind everything I've ever owned. And I yelled at my backup. I'm like, I need another hook, because he had just got done climbing up my last hook and I had to toss it. And at that exact moment, I have to lunge forward to grab him before he goes underneath the shelf. And he beams a hook at me, nails me in the head. I catch it on the rebound, got the snake. We're good. Back into the can. Everything's smooth. There's a guy hit you in the face. I'm like, I don't care. We caught the snake. Yeah. It doesn't matter. But they can be a handful. Cool, though.
Awesome. Thank you. Erik, same question to you. What's the most overrated species, and what would you keep for the rest of your snake keeping career?
I mean, kings are my favorite, so they'd be the one I'd keep. It's my favorite snake, non-venomous and venomous. They're great snakes. Challenging, but great snakes. Overrated. Excuse me. There's a few out there. I mean, like Brandon said, gaboons. I know a couple of people that are in love with Bitis. They just like, Bitis is life. The problem with gaboons and, let's say, monocle cobras is their availability and their price in the hobby. We talk about overrated, and I mean, all snakes have their own unique traits. I mean, monocle cobras, I mean, they're kind of dumb. I mean, they don't do much for me. They hood up, they strike it, whatever. They'll strike at the glass, strike at the tub. I mean, they're a little psychotic sometimes. But I don't really get a lot of enjoyment out of keeping them. I mean, they're not like, I don't know. I just don't find, and I really don't find them as intelligent snakes. I mean, I'm sure they are, and it's something. I just haven't found what they're intelligent at. A lot of the ones that I've seen, I mean, a lot of the ones that I've seen are bad. Like, they're not bad eaters, but they're stupid when they go to strike things. I mean, they're just, it's almost like they're like the redheaded stepchild. Like, they're just clumsy but they're just so plentiful in the hobby, and they're so cheap that, I mean, like, everybody's got to own a monocle cobra. So those are the two I go with. I mean, a gaboon viper, wild caught gaboon viper, you could have for $75. I mean, like anybody could buy a gaboon viper at a show. It's cheaper than half the non-venomous snakes out there. It's like the price of a normal ball python.
Right.
So, but that's what I'd go with. And I mean, like, the only thing I'd like to say, to kind of close on my part when it comes to these things is, obviously I'd like to see an increase in price on a lot of them. I don't think that they should be as affordable as they are. Unfortunately they are, because when some of these things come in from the wild, there's hundreds of them, and obviously it's all about supply and demand, and people that are wholesaling them want to get rid of them. And you can't always vet people properly. I mean, a lot of times at the show, a lot of these people are it's about the sale, it's not about anything else. But I'd like to see, the market on some of these snakes, like I don't think you should be able to buy a mamba for $250. Like I just don't. I don't think even a wild caught mamba that's scarred to hell, I don't think it should be a $250 snake, you know? I mean, not when you got ball python morphs selling for $750 to $1,000. But on the flip side of it, this is a business for some people, you know? So it's tough both ways. But well, those are my thoughts on it. And, you know, I hope, as Brandon said, I hope there never comes a nationwide ban, even though, you know, with our current government, there seems to be, you know, some weird stuff going on as far as, you know, law enacting and, you know, policies. And, you know, I wouldn't say that this particular scenario is government overreach, because, I mean, it's not a right, it's a privilege. So at any time, any government could take away our privilege for doing this. And, you know, I don't know if it'll ever get to the nationwide level. I don't know if it's important enough nationwide. You know, not like the Big Cat Safety Act, which is a bigger thing. I don't know if reptile keeping will ever get on the national stage. But it definitely will get to county and state stages around the United States. That's already been proven. So I hope everyone could stay responsible. I hope new keepers coming into this continue to stay responsible and learn the right stuff. I mean, you know, we all do dumb stuff. You know, don't publish the dumb stuff you do. You know, don't. It's not necessary. So that's it.
Thank you, guys. And you know, I always bring up during these panels, I'll talk about USARK, and you know, if there's one organization out there that's fighting for our rights, our privileges, right? But you know, we have an expression, fight for our rights. It's USARK, and they're a powerful lobbying group that helps out, whether there's they or not. But
yeah, they are. I mean, I'm a USARK member. I have been for several years. I believe in them. You know, the hard part is that the one thing all reptile keepers have to realize is we're always under the microscope when it comes to stuff, and people that hate reptiles far outweigh the number of reptile keepers. So when it comes to a lot of these lawmakers and things like that, these lawmakers, you know, they're listening to their constituents. You know, they're listening to people that vote for them, and their voting base, it's a lot broader with non-reptile keeping people than it is with reptile keeping people. So, I mean, USARK's really our only voice in the matter that comes to the table from a legal action perspective that's able to fight some of these things, and they have a pretty good success rate. You know, not always at reversing or bans, but sometimes extending or postponing, or, you know. But I mean, I would encourage everybody, because, you know, it's not like a big paid organization where a whole bunch of people are taking crazy salaries from it. It's a great organization. They do well they do right by reptile keepers, and I know they spend a lot on protecting our rights, and they've had some very, very good legal battles they've won. And I would encourage everybody to become a member for $5 a month or $50 a year, or whatever it costs.
It's 40 a year. It's so easy.
It is. I mean, most everybody that keeps venomous snakes should be a USARK member.
Yeah.
I mean, one monocled cobra, actually not even, a half a gaboon viper pays for your yearly membership. And there's nobody in venomous snakes that just owns one gaboon viper. So you've got enough money to contribute to it.
Guys, I'm going to take the last 60 seconds here and do a quick lightning round. So these are just like one-word answers. So just answer the first word that comes to your mind. Erik, beer or candy?
Beer.
Brandon, dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Erik, rocks or plants?
Rocks.
Brandon, what's your favorite dinosaur?
Stegosaurus.
Erik, what's your favorite plant?
The thing from Rocky Horror Picture Show, the Venus flytrap, big thing.
Brandon, are you afraid of spiders?
No.
Erik, chicken or mashed potatoes?
Mashed potatoes all day long.
Brandon, go to the beach or go camping?
Go camping.
Guys, that's it. Thank you very much for joining me today. I really appreciate the answers. I feel like you guys had a good 10 hours of information in you, but the time zone difference is pretty big. So I really appreciate you guys staying up late for me.
No worries.
spending time on this. So that's it. Thanks for the folks that tuned in and out. Yeah, we'll be in touch. Have a great day, guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brandon. Good talking
Thank
to you
you.
again, buddy.
Yeah, nice seeing you, man.
All right. See you later.
Yeah, have a good one.
Bye, guys.